أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to this panel on freedom and social justice hosted by the Imam Ali Conference. My name is Zahra. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today with our two esteemed scholars who I'll introduce briefly now. We have a panel on freedom and social justice hosted by the Imam Ali Conference. My name is Zahra. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today with our two esteemed scholars who I'll introduce briefly now. We have with us Dr. Hassan Abbas, who's a distinguished professor of international relations at the Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center, National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He's a senior advisor at the Project on Shi'ism and Global Affairs at Harvard University's Divinity School, where I also work as a research associate. And his current work is on building narratives for countering political and religious extremism and rule of law reforms in developing states. His latest book, which I'm sure we all know, is The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, which provides a portrait of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the man who assumed the spiritual mantle of Islam to spearhead the movement that the Prophet had led. We also have with us Shaikh Muhammad Omar Ramadhan, who is the chairman of the Ramadan Foundation. He became the youngest person to be interviewed on the world's renowned BBC Hard Talk to discuss the July 7th terrorist attacks in London and the response from the Muslim community in the UK. And one of his central messages is to promote tolerance and peaceful coexistence. So inshallah, I'm really excited to benefit from the political and religious expertise of both of these scholars as we talk about words that get thrown around a lot in America, in the liberal secular West, freedom and social justice, and what these things sort of mean in the ethos of Imam Ali. So I'll give the floor first to Shaikh Muhammad Omar Ramadan. Please, Shaikh.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal-mursaleen. وعلى آله الطيبين والطاهرين والصحابته رضوان الله عليهم أجمعين. Thank you, sister, for your kind introduction, and I want to thank the Imam Ali Conference for this kind invitation. I want to get straight to our area of discussion today, which is on Imam Ali alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the upholder to freedom and social justice. There's a claim that if you study political theory, that the first individual to conceptualize the rights of citizens was Imam Ali himself. There's a debate amongst academics that ancient Greeks or the times of the Romans, rights that we understand in the modern connotation was not defined. But if you go to the books of Sirah, if you go to the books of Manaqib and so forth, especially the letters that were written by Amir al-Mu'mineen, one thing that becomes very envisaged from those writings is Amir al-Mu'mineen's theory and Amir al-Mu'mineen's political assertion to conceptualize citizens' rights. Now, before him, neither the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam nor did his Khulafa Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, ridwanallahu alayhim ajma'in, none of them actually engage in the theorization of what is governance and what is a Muslim society. How do you define an Islamic country, an Islamic government? And one of the reasons behind that was because they were facing challenges and crises of their time. It was only at the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when the Muslims had matured, other tribulations had occurred, that Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he became the leader, he then had the time and he had an ability to theorize this. This is this is demonstrated in length by a letter that Amir al-Mu'mineen writes to his confidant and his close companion, the governor of Egypt, Sayyiduna Malik al-Ashtar al-Nakha'i radiyallahu anhu, one of the great supporters of Imam Ali. In that letter, Amir al-Mu'mineen, in length, to summarize, the letter is quite lengthy, which is found in Ajul Balagha, it's found in many other historical manuscripts. Amir al-Mu'mineen debates three ideas, and he puts forth and he conceptualizes holistically this idealism of what is governance, what is freedom, and what is social justice. The first idea is who should rule. Secondly, how should one rule? And thirdly, why do we need a government? Taking into account all of these three aspects of the theory of a state, the legitimate political system for an Islamic society, according to Amir al-Mu'mineen, he defines it in a way in which I would interpret it modernly as calling it a welfare limited guardianship, quite similar to Max Weber's concept of the tripartite classification of authority. In fact, it was after Amir al-Mu'mineen's lengthy letter, we see, for example, his grandson, Imam al-Sajjad, Zain al-Abidin Ali bin Hussein, radiyallahu anhu wa ridwanallahu alayhim ajma'een, he writes what we call Sahif al-Kamila al-Sajjadiyya, or Hukuk al-Sajjadiyya, the treaties of human beings, the rights of a state, the rights of individuals, the rights of so forth. So this first argument put forth by many of the supporters of Amir al-Mu'mineen shows his delicate manner of dealing with defining of what an Islamic society is. What is this conceptualization? In freedom and the concept of social justice, I have very limited time. It's a very vast subject. But one of the things that becomes very clear to me as an academic and as a scholar who researches in traditional sciences is Amir al-Mu'mineen's sense of social justice, Amir al-Mu'mineen's sense of upholding freedom. For example, when a delegation came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and said to Amir al-Mu'mineen from Egypt, at that time Egypt was not supporting him, that if you did one thing, only one thing, we would give you the support of all of Egypt against Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, what was that? They said, appoint Amr bin As as the governor. Amir al-Mu'mineen turned around and said, I cannot do that, for indeed he is unjust. I cannot do that which is injustice. This shows a utopia of the type of world that Amir al-Mu'mineen is trying to continue from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Further, if you look at the tribulations of Jamal, when Az-Zubair and Talha and Aisha Ridwanallahu alayhim ajma'in rose up against Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Jamal, we find one thing very clear. Amir al-Mu'mineen gave them their freedom and he gave them their liberties, even though three individuals who are highly respected amongst the community could have been arrested for treason and for many other reasons, against crimes against the state. But Amir al-Mu'mineen upheld their freedom. A further indication is even at the Battle of Siffin, when he fights Muawiyah. Muawiyah very infamously says, asks a number of questions to Amir al-Mu'mineen, in which Amir al-Mu'mineen echoes and says, bless and all praise is due to Allah, that even our enemies in the battlefield need our knowledge. Further, I want to go towards the ending of what I want to present to them, is a further clear indication of one of the biggest tribulations that Amir al-Mu'mineen faced, which was the Khawarij, this narrow-minded, sadistic, killing ideology, takfir. Takfirism originates from these people. They were the ones that murdered Abdullah bin Khabab bin Arad, and there's many incidents and many examples of their atrocities. Yet Amir al-Mu'mineen did not stop them from enjoying their liberties and their freedoms. In fact, continuing on from the policies of Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, Amir al-Mu'mineen provided what we call a public welfare system. He provided individuals with money and support, income support. These members of the Khawarij, even though they were known to be outlaws and a menace to society, Amir al-Mu'mineen still did not violate their rights and still provided them with what we call sustenance and so forth. These are all indications of the greatness and how he upheld freedom and social justice. In concluding, what I would say is we have to also be very extremely careful that we don't understand a connotation of the term freedom in a Western colonization, but we understand it holistically from what the Quran says, what the A'immah have said, and what our scholars have said. Again, I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. There's a lot to discuss, but inshallah, maybe in the future we can have a further discussion, and maybe in the question and answers, I can share a bit of more things with you. Jazakallah khair, and thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Sheikh. Jazakallah khair. I think what you're saying about the sort of baseline dignity that is afforded people and like the sort of conception of Imam Ali of what it means to live in a just society and what justice even is. And I think it's also interesting you bring up Weber, because when we're talking about sort of the canon or like the hadith of political theory in the Western Academy, we throw around these names like Weber, and I'm really interested in what it would look like to sort of build indigenously Islamic sort of political theory and the idea of what a state is. And of course, this is a question that plagues the Muslim community for the entirety of its existence, even after Imam Ali. You know, what is the caliphate? What is leadership? Who gets to lead? And we have sort of a sort of interesting, really interesting ways that this gets sliced up by different scholars over time. But I think it's so imperative. And maybe you can, I'll just ask you this quick question before I give the floor to Dr. Abbas. But what do you think should be sort of the prerogative of the Muslim community in incorporating these indigenously Islamic theories into sort of how we conceive of governance in the West?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and one of the things that we have is examples from early Islam of how Muslims engaged in as minorities in majority countries that were non-Muslims ruled, how to engage politically, how to engage socially. And one of the things that we Muslims have failed to identify is what I call an identity crisis, maybe not in the US, but especially within European Muslims. Am I a Pakistani? Am I a British? Am I a French? Am I a European? Echoing what Tariq Ramadan calls. I wouldn't go as far as what he theorizes, the idea that we have a European family, but there is an identity crisis. Muslims need to be able to reinforce these theories that have been put forth by our leaders and be able to express them in the best of way. Unfortunately, when we fail to do that, that is the reason why we have the response, for example, to the recent burning of the Quran, where Muslims are unable to conceptualize intellectually, academically, their arguments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think and actually there will be another panel, inshallah, within this conference about identity crisis, because I think identity politics is something that has racked us as a community for so long, and something that we really need to sort of move beyond and build beyond. I could speak to you all day, but I think it's time that we now hear from our esteemed panelist, Dr. Abbas. I now give the floor to you. Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. I am truly honored to be in this panel, at this conference, especially in the company of the moderator, who's a scholar also, and Shaykh Ramadhan. Shaykh Ramadhan had made this much easier for me, because the way he has set the stage, he has touched upon some of the most central features of what is freedom all about and what justice is all about in the context that we are talking about. Let me begin with one quote, perhaps the shortest quote from Imam Ali alayhi salam, but I think the most profound one. Imam had said, Amir al-Mu'mineen had said, people are your subjects, or people are of two kinds, either your brother in faith or your brother in humanity. I think this was the central idea of equality, and freedom go hand in hand. Without equality, or the idea of equality and equity, there is no idea of freedom and no idea of justice. And I'll explain how these three linked in the teachings of Imam Ali. But this is how I wanted to frame them. Secondly, I would argue that, as was rightly pointed out, at times we use these modern phrases which have an own European, Western, recent historical context. And at times there's a wrong effort to necessarily try to fit in the Islamic principles, the Islamic ideals and values into that frame. And that time, at times, for any thinking people, any of those who are thoughtful and those who are into the pursuance of knowledge and excellence can create confusion. But just we can use those as hooks in this idea. I would argue, to begin with, that there are 2 or 3 principles, depending on the time I'll go into all 3, but maybe 2, which are the defining characteristics of the idea of freedom and the idea of justice and how they are linked. First and foremost, I think if there was anything which Imam Ali throughout his life was fighting for intellectually as well as physically when needed, was the idea to fight against oppression and fight against authoritarianism. Because authoritarianism is the biggest enemy of freedom. Freedom to think, freedom to interpret, freedom to share your ideas. And it is authoritarianism and oppression which just takes away the soul of these ideas. So whether you study Nahjul Balagha or especially the Imam Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar, it becomes so clear that at every point, Imam is doing 2 things. One, he's challenging the idea of authoritarianism, which tragically in the Islamic history has become a main feature. You pick a history book of Islam, whether it is Umayyads or Abbasids or later on even many Muslim empires, the way the Muslims built their modern state and society also, the idea of the authoritarian mechanism seems to be the galvanizing factor. And this is so tragic because this takes away the spirit of Islam. So I wanted to emphasize on that point. Secondly, I remember as a very humble student of Islamic studies and ideas, when I read Nahjul Balagha and some of the other quotations from Imam, and this is one other factor, how much of Imam's legacy and knowledge and scholarship was retained. I mean, there's no other personality other than the great, of course, his master and our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Other than him, his hadith literature is there, but other than him, you compare the collection of all the Sahaba Ikarams, their statements, their anecdotes, their stories, their speeches, their writings. They're on one side, Imam Ali's on the other side, and it was because of the profound nature of this. So the second theme that I found so much spread across Imam's teachings is the idea of the rights of the poor. At every point, Imam is emphasizing, be careful about the poor. Now, he's not saying this poor, what is his belief system, what is his religion. When Imam had become the caliph, he never asked, okay, who are the people who were with me when the challenge of Saqif had happened? Or who were the people with me who were my friends? Or who were on my side politically or religiously? I'll not go into that details. But Imam never had a bias for anyone towards him or against him. What was that? One, he accepted the freedom of everyone to make their position, even if those decisions and ideas were against him. He never kept a grudge in a sense that we think he did. And that was because he accepted the idea of freedom of everyone. And secondly, he never believed in imposing in any authoritarian fashion what he believed in. Yes, when he became the caliph, he made some of the points very, very clear. On his first day, the statement that Imam Ali made, he said, okay, anyone who has taken anyone else's rights, whether they was the ruling elite, which he was referring to, he said, I'm going to take back those rights. And anyone who thinks that they are going to have a right on me, or that they will have a special favor, whether they are my brothers or somebody else, they should be clear that that is not going to happen. I think that was a central idea through which the idea of justice flows, through which the idea of freedom flows. A couple of statements, for instance, from Nahjul Balagha that stay in my mind always. One is his emphasis on the common person. When he said, the displeasure of the common people, and it's my translation, displeasure of the common people outweighs the approval of the important people. He's somehow always on the side of the those who are disempowered, those who have nothing, against taking their rights, because he's always referring to there are rights of rulers over the ruled and the rule over the rulers. And he said, At one point. If that is not, there's not balance, it leads to oppression. That's how I would frame this central idea of Imam and on justice. Again, a letter to Malik al-Ashtar, and I'm referring to that letter again and again for a reason. It is such a tragedy that our sectarian narratives and divisions have taken from us some of the most beautiful legacies of Islam, which is one of this is the letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which frames the ideas of equality, of justice in an Islamic context so clearly, and equality. But those are taken away, and I will just spend a second mentioning on this. It needs to be probed why the letter to Malik al-Ashtar, despite its profound thoughtfulness and the idea of governance, why it has not become mainstream in Muslim thinking today, for example. It is because many people have biased with the name of Malik al-Ashtar. Because of the historical context, the grudges, the biases that are entrenched because of the fixation on certain, our own narrative, I belong to tradition X, I belong to tradition Y. So in that process, we have lost the ideals of Imam Ali, and Imam Ali's ideals were not his personal ideals. Everything that, and I often quote when I was working on my book on Imam Ali, the Prophet said, and I was meeting Ayatollah Sayyid Saidul Hakim, and I asked him when I was leaving, I said, Sayyid, please tell me one final message. He said, be very clear. You're writing a biography of Imam Ali. There was nothing that Imam Ali did that was his personal thinking or philosophy. Everything he knew was what he learned from the great Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whatever he did was a translation or interpretation or dissemination of the message of the great master. And those messages were about the rights of the ordinary people and the poor people. I will end with, I have so much to say on this, and some of the remarks from the moderator and Shaikh really inspired me, but I'll close with this one other example. I mean, there could have been tons of examples on the idea of judiciary and the way Imam, before Montesquieu or Rousseau or the European Enlightenment, Imam had said the judicial office should not be under the influence of the executive. So the idea of separation of different branches of the government, which we take pride on, rightly so today, because that creates a certain level of accountability. Imam Ali had so clearly and categorically said that, because that then establishes the idea of justice and freedom. I'll close with the final words of Imam. And emphasize one point. When he was in his final moments, and this is from mainstream historical context, and he is giving his final message while taking his final breath, he said to his sons and the other people who were around him, one point which is slightly different, but because it is there in that message, I'll start with that. He said, hold fast to the rope of God and avoid discord. I heard Abul Qasim, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he quotes him, the renewal of unity is better than all your prayers and fasting. And then he said, fear God with regard to those who have a right to your protection and hospitality. Fear God with regard to the protection granted by your Prophet, and do not allow the dhimmi to be oppressed among you. Who was the dhimmi at that time? Christians and Jews and others who were not belonging to the faith of Islam. In his final moment, he's concerned about the rights of those people, because he acknowledged the freedom of everyone. He didn't mean to or believe in oppression, nor wanted anyone after him to oppress people. That is, I think, to be against authoritarianism, to stand for fighting oppression, and to stand for the idea of rights of everyone is what is the soul of Islam from Amir al-Mu'mineen's point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair. You touched on so many things. And again, I think this is a conversation we could have all day. But I think sort of something that I'm hearing from both of you, first of all, this letter to Malik al-Ashtar, of course, it's a masterpiece. And the idea that so much of sort of the amazing literature and personalities from the Islamic canon are overlooked or not engaged with seriously because of polemics within the Muslim community, I think is really important. But just to touch on this idea of freedom, I mean, it seems that the purpose of freedom is to sort of remove the roadblocks for a person's spiritual growth and journey. Like, it seems like sort of Imam Ali's ethos and this freedom, it's like, uphold the rights of the poor, make sure there's no authoritarianism, make sure there's no sort of oppression, make sure that there are no systemic and sort of physical barriers for people to be able to pursue their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, if a person is going to arrive on the day of judgment having not traversed their path, make sure it's not on your account. Make sure that you make this life as easy for people as possible. And I think that's really intimately tied to the idea of justice in Islam, which is that everything should be in its proper place. Wealth should be in its proper place. Respect, authority should all be in its proper place. Love should be in its proper place. I mean, that is what justice is at its core. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I'll just pose this final question to both of you, and you can each answer as briefly as possible, as I'm being told by the organizers. What do you think is sort of, for someone who is interested in these topics, is interested in sort of building out an Islamic idea of justice and freedom in the modern world, besides this letter to Malik al-Ashtar, which we know is a masterpiece, where do we sort of begin in the writings of Imam Ali, but also in all our texts and all our books? What is sort of the system that you would advise for people interested in this topic? Please, Dr. Abbas, I call on you first.
Thank you so much. I think the answer was in one of the statements you made, very well framed, to remove the roadblocks to spiritual excellence, because that's where the most problematic obstacles and challenges come in. And because that is where the imposition of ideas come in. So, and I'll give example only one, given the time. When Khawarij started their campaign, it was not necessarily violent to begin with, but they were sitting in the mosque in Kufa. Imam Ali never stopped them from challenging him. He involved them, engaged with them in intellectual religious discourse. Even when they became violent and they were eliminated, some people said, okay, throw them in dig one big grave, throw them in. And he said, no. In some cases, he said, we will recite the funeral prayers on them, because he said they were distracted, or they were distanced, and they went on the wrong path. But he was not ready to just declare all of them in a certain category. So that's where we start from: tolerance, accepting the other's view, and most importantly, engaging. How many different, I come back to the point, how many different sects of Islam? I mean, we have such great personalities with luminaries like Shaikh Ramadhan, who engaged with all sides, but going to ordinary scholars, and I'm including everyone, the Shia, the Sunni, the Salafi, everyone, how many engagements happen? Engagements are not happening because there's not tolerance. There's no tolerance because we don't respect the idea of freedom of having a religious discourse. The blockages are right there in our minds. We need to first eliminate them, then the pathway to spiritual excellence is right in front of us. Thank you.
Inshallah, yeah, I think that's the biggest, I think, obstacle to just governance and to freedom and to justice is our own spiritual roadblocks, our own egos. That is the tainting factor. I mean, that is the thing, like on the micro level, that becomes macro, and that leads to injustice. Shaikh, I give you the floor for our closing comments. If you would like to answer the question I posed, or if you would like to leave the audience with whatever you see fit at this point.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair, and thank you to organizers, and thank you to Dr. Hassan Abbas for his beautiful words. I think one of the things that I would advise students of knowledge, researchers and academics, is to remove this polemical differences that we have. So when we approach historical context and when we approach historical narratives, we do it not from a polemical perspective. This is one of the things that I do under my role at the Center for Intra-Muslim Studies in Birmingham, SIMS, where we bring different scholars together to look at how do we view this? And I think one of the things I would advise our young students of knowledge is that you don't need to reject everything in a certain book if you're from a different orientation or different background. So if you do not agree, let's say, with a Shia background theologically, you can still massively benefit from some of the literature and some of the writings and some of the quotations in Najul Balagha, especially the letter that Amir al-Mu'mineen writes to his student and his confidant. So I think we have to remove this narrow-mindedness, engage with each other, sit with each other, and be able to holistically look at this. And this is finally one of the reasons why people like such great statesmen and leaders and scholars like Malik al-Ashtar, one of the reasons why Malik bin Harith is not really wholeheartedly welcomed within the community is because of a political endeavor at that time to paint him with a negative image of being amongst the murderers of Uthman radiallahu anhu, which is a total lie and which is an accusation, a fabrication against his greatness. So I think engagement is extremely important. Again, I thank Sayyid Jawad al-Qazwini and the whole team for this kind invitation. And inshallah, in the future, we can share more information. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah. Thank you so much to both of you. I benefited tremendously from this gathering, and inshallah, I'll be contacting you both directly for more gatherings, inshallah, and more conversations. And I'll just close with a thank you to the organizers of the Imam Ali conference. May inshallah all these panels bring benefit and blessings, and may we all be able to remove our own spiritual roadblocks, be comfortable with disagreement in the historical sources and amongst ourselves, and build, inshallah, pious selves among us in the Muslim community, and build a just society for our brothers in faith and our brothers in humanity, inshallah. And if any of the viewers have any comments, questions, please reach out to us, the organizers, our esteemed scholars. We look forward to engaging with you. And Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.